quick demonstration of Ansible Tower, and then I'll start tackling these questions, and we can certainly go in any direction that you folks like today. So that was Ansible, right? We looked really fast at Ansible. We talked about it at a high level. We looked at an example playbook, and I can show you how to run that through the command line as well. Let's take a moment to look at Tower. Tower is what we're looking at here in my web browser now. I'm running Tower, by the way, on a VM here locally. Tower is on-premise software. You're going to install it in your data centers, in your environments. It can be anything, physical, virtual, cloud, we don't care. But it's something that you run in your data centers. We don't host Ansible Tower. Of course, Tower keeps all of your keys and credentials, and we don't want that information at Ansible.com. So we don't host Tower. It's on-premise software. Tower is a Django application, so it runs in Django on a Linux host and uses a Postgres database to store all of its data, as well as a MongoDB to cache certain bits of data as well. So that's the software stack. It is, if you go out to ansible.com/tower, you can grab a free trial of it. In fact, let me just pull that up here quickly. So you go to ansible.com, there's a 20-minute demo video there and a free trial. So feel free to go out and grab Ansible Tower. It's installed with an Ansible playbook, by the way. So it's a really easy, simple installation as well. Get up and running pretty fast. If you're not familiar with Ansible yet, then I'm going to point you at ansible.com/getting started, which is another great resource. And this is going to help you. Oh, let me find the right URL for that. Let me find the right URL. I'll come back to that, and I'm going to point you to some particular getting started bits there. All right, back to Tower. So Tower is not a commercial or enterprise version of Ansible. I mentioned that earlier, right? Tower layers on top of Ansible and provides a framework for consuming an open source command line tool in your enterprise, right? So it offers features that you just don't get from the command line, that just don't make sense in the command line. So the things that I'll show you here specifically will be, number one, role-based access control, right? So you can explicitly control who can run what playbooks against what hosts. Number two, push-button deployment, and this is again what Splunk uses to provide a self-service interface to their developers. So you can launch playbooks with the push of a button without any knowledge of the Ansible command line. Number three, the aggregation of logs, right? So I have an audit trail of all of the playbooks that I've ever been run through Tower, and I can audit that information. And finally, and probably the most important feature, is the RESTful API. So I'll show you that at the end here, but everything that I can do point and click through the UI, I can do through the API. The UI is really just a wrapper for the API. So just keep that in mind. Here we're looking at the dashboard for Ansible Tower. This is a fresh installation of Ansible Tower. I installed it 2 days ago, so it's pretty new, relatively new here. So I immediately see a quick graph of all of my deployments over the last month or the last week or 24 hours there, and I've timed out, so let me log back in while we were chatting. So I've got all of my deployments over the last, say, week, for example, when I installed this tower back on the 8th, so no history before that. You can see I'm managing 38 hosts with this particular tower instance at the moment, 21 of which have some failed jobs, and I can drill down into any of these hot links and get more information about any of this about any of these statistics. I can see my most recent job runs on the lower right, and these are going to be primarily Ansible playbook runs. Tower also synchronizes with upstream inventory sources like Amazon, like VMware, like OpenStack, to get the list of hosts to manage. So you'll see those as jobs as well. And Tower also synchronizes with version control repositories, right? So the best practice is keep your playbooks and config data in version control, and Tower will just pull that in. So you'll see those as jobs here as well. Let's dive into the role-based access control real fast here. And so I'm logged in, by the way, as an admin user, so I have access to everything. I can see everything. But depending on what user you're logged in as, of course, in Tower, your view will change, right, depending on what you have permission to. So with Tower, you can create as many users as you like, and I've got a few here. And these users can come from, by the way, LDAP or Active Directory. So you don't have to create these users by hand or by API. You can synchronize directly to AD or LDAP, and Tower will authenticate against those platforms, but also it will automatically create users here in Tower for you if like an AD user were to log in for the very first time, for example. So you can synchronize with LDAP or AD for user management. And you can also group your users together in teams. And team grouping can also come from LDAP or AD as well. And of course, with teams, you can have as many as you like here. I've got development, operations, and QA. And each of these teams has its own set of permissions. Each team and each user, I should say, has its own set of permissions. And so this is a scalable way to manage permissions across lots and lots of users, for example, right? So either at the team level or at the user level, I can set these permissions and explicitly control exactly what users can do here. In this case, I'm giving the development team permission to run any playbooks from this Ansible examples project. Again, a project is just a version control repo of playbooks. And so I'm giving them permission to run any playbooks from Ansible examples and from Sandbox and run those out to the development inventory, my inventory of hosts that happen to be in development. And by the same token, I have an operations team that can run the same sets of playbooks. They can also run Ansible examples and my Sandbox project, but they only run these out to hosts in production, in my production inventory, right? So I've got my inventories are development, production, and QA, and based on those permission schemes that we just saw, I'm limiting my users and my teams to what sets of hosts they can see, in these different inventories. So each of these inventories has its own set of hosts. My production hosts are coming from Amazon in this particular case. My development hosts happen to be local VMs, and I've segregated those out into their own inventories and then permitted my users accordingly through that role-based access control. So if a production, a member of the operations team were to log in, they wouldn't see my development hosts at all, much less be able to launch any playbooks against those. But again, I am letting the two teams, see the same projects, right? And that's because I want these teams, again, to use the same playbooks to deploy the software stacks the same way in both production and development. So by making those playbooks available to multiple teams, I can encourage reuse, collaboration, and again drive out errors due to inconsistencies. So my operations team, my development team are using the same playbooks. They're only permitted to deploy to the hosts they have permission to. And alongside that are credentials. Credentials are, of course, the secrets that you have to pass into Ansible in order to run a playbook, right? So if I'm running a playbook against a set of Linux hosts, I need an SSH key or password. I need a Windows password for my Windows hosts. If I'm talking to any of my different clouds, VMware or Amazon, for example, then I'll need authentication for those as well. Now, normally on the command line, the user has to pass those things in, right? The user has to know those things. The user has to know the SSH key or the password and be able to pass that to Ansible on the command line when Ansible's invoked, when the playbook is run. But here in Tower, we can actually abstract that away, right? So in Tower, we keep the key in Tower, encrypted, stored in the database. It's just not retrievable by anyone. So not even the admin user can reach out and get this key from Tower. It's encrypted in the database. It's not retrievable from the UI or the API or the database. So in this way, I can assign the key to, say, a user or a team, so we could assign it to our operations team, for example. And now anyone in operations can use this key to run a playbook, but they still can't see the key. They can't get the key out of Tower, and they wouldn't be able to use it out of band, to do something else. And that goes for all the sort of secrets that you might pass through Ansible. If you're using, say, sudo, for example, from a privilege escalation perspective, sudo or su, then you can pass the passwords in through Tower as well, and they'll be locked away. If you're using Ansible Vault, which is our encrypted data store, you can lock that password away as well. So any secrets that you might have to pass are not exposed to the actual end user. And that enables push button deployment, right? So now that the credentials are locked away, I can, under role-based access control, provide a menu of different playbooks, essentially, that a user can run, and let them just come in here and press the button, to launch this, right? Or launch it via API. So by setting up the permissions, I can restrict this menu that we're seeing right here of these job templates. I can restrict this list to just the list that a user should be able to see based on permission, right? You know, whether they see the production deployments or the development deployments, etc. So this menu here you can offer to your user would be restricted under that role-based access control. They would only see the templates that they have permission to. They can launch the template by pressing the button, and Tower will attach the credential accordingly, so they never see the credential either. And so in this way, you can provide a push-button interface, and that has a lot of different use cases. I mentioned the Splunk use case, where Splunk uses it to, you know, as a self-service interface for developers. Rackspace uses it as a way of delegating responsibility to level 1 and level 2 technicians, for example. Again, anywhere where you might want to run a playbook without the user being an Ansible expert, right? Maybe the user didn't write the playbook, maybe they don't know how or don't care how to run it on the command line. You can give them this interface, and they can leverage Ansible without being an Ansible expert, right? So each one of these job templates simply captures all of the options you would normally pass on the command line, right? That's what they're doing here. So normally on the command line, you'd have to specify all of this information. You'd have to say, am I running this job in run mode or in check mode, which is a dry run mode for Ansible? You know, what inventory of hosts am I targeting? What playbook do I want to run? What credentials do I need to run that playbook? Even overriding variables that are in the playbook itself, right? So if you've got variables in the playbook, you can override them here, right? Specify a different version of the application, or an HTTP port number, or a database password, or whatever. You can override that in the template. You can also ask the end user for that information. Again, so if you're providing a self-service interface, your user may come in here, they may press the button, and you may ask them, as I'm doing here, questions and pass the values back down to the playbook, such as, you know, what password do I want to use for the database this time, or what version of the application do I want to deploy. And so Tower has a built-in form builder. That was that dialog that we just saw pop up, a built-in form builder that allows us to build that form and ask the user those kind of questions and then pass their answers back down to the playbook. And so that's what we're doing there. So I just launched that playbook for us. It'll take a couple of minutes to kick off. I've got Tower first set up to go synchronize with my upstream inventory source before it runs the playbook. So it's going to go synchronize right now with Amazon, and then it's going to run this playbook for us. Now this particular playbook is quite a bit more advanced than the simple one that we were looking at a minute ago. This playbook actually not only it deploys Apache, but it deploys a complete multi-tier environment. So it deploys a couple of Apache web servers, a MySQL server. It also deploys an HA proxy load balancer and a Nagios monitoring server. And not only does it do all of that config management of installing the software and configuration, but then it actually deploys a web application for us. And then finally, it adds the web servers to the load balancing pool and all of the hosts to Nagios. So that's an example of application deployment and orchestration on top of traditional config management. So Ansible and Ansible Tower are going to deploy the entire environment for me, at the end of which I'll have, you know, a couple of web servers load balanced attached to a database server. So Tower is going to aggregate the logs of all of that activity for us. So although if we were sitting at the command line running this, we'd be able to see similar logs as we're seeing here. As I mentioned before, those logs just go away when we're done on the command line, right? On the command line, there's no centralized logging at all. So if we all ran the same playbooks against the same host, we really have no idea of what each other did without something like Tower. Tower provides that centralized logging for us so that, depending on our user permissions, we can come in and see the result of these playbook runs, even what others have done, and audit that, right? So Tower is going to run through and provide us lots of detail right now as it's live running through this. When it's done, we'll be able to go to the Jobs tab and see the result of that as well, just like I can see all of the other jobs that I've ever run since installing this new Tower a couple of days ago. So I've got something like 70 plus jobs here that I've run through this Tower installation over the last couple of days, and I can go audit this and look at any of this, right? So I can go to one of our previous jobs of running this exact same deployment here, and I can see the result of that. It looks like I did that earlier today, this morning. I'm on Eastern Standard Time, and it took about 11 minutes, and I can see that it was the user admin that actually launched this job earlier today, with these particular parameters, including any parameter that was overridden or passed, right? Of course, I'm not exposing the password there. That's encrypted. But otherwise, any parameters that were passed into the playbook are being captured here. So we have this audit trail. We can always tell exactly what happened. Who did it? How was it launched? What parameters were passed to it? What the result was, right? You get a tremendous amount of detail on each one of these tasks from Tower. So if you wanted to drill in and see any one of these tasks against any one of these hosts, you can see lots of detail about exactly what module in the playbook was being executed with what arguments, and of course the results and even the standard output. Here's the standard output of Yum installing these Nagios packages for us. And we also get the standard output as if we were sitting right at the command line. So if you're an Ansible command line user, you don't lose any of that info. All of that standard output is right here. And again, we keep this history around by default forever. You can clean it out, of course. And so that's really the third major value of Tower. I've talked about the aggregation of logs is what we just looked at. We talked about push button deployment. We're running the job now. And we looked at, of course, the role-based access control. So the last thing that I want to show you with Tower, and then we'll answer these questions here, is the API, right? So I mentioned that everything you can do point and click here, you can do via the API. The API is browsable at /API from a Tower URL. So you just drop right into /API. And it's pretty self-documenting as well. Just expand all of the question marks here to expand the descriptions. But any object that's inside of Tower is fair game for managing via the API. You can create, delete, update any of these objects through the API, so you can programmatically create lots of things. The most common use of the API is to launch jobs, right? And so it's a very common pattern to wire up continuous integration tools to Ansible through the Tower API, meaning you take a tool like Jenkins or Bamboo or TeamCity, any continuous integration tool, and you call out to the API at the end of your build to launch an Ansible playbook to deploy, right, to do your deploy task, whatever that may be. And so through the API, of course, you can get the API and list the jobs, but you can also post to the API to create a job, right? And you just need to pass in the job template ID number. So when you create your job templates in Tower, that gives you a human interface to press the button or schedule and launch a job as we just did, but it also, you can use the exact same job template and launch it programmatically through the API. So you get both a machine and human interface to that object. And so very easy to launch from a continuous integration. In fact, there's also a tool called Tower-CLI, which is a command line wrapper for the API for Tower. It's open source Python command line tool. You just drop it right onto your continuous integration host, and then you can tell it where Tower lives, and give it a username and password, and then it can happily launch jobs and monitor the result for you. Again, it's just a wrapper for the API, just to make it convenient and easy for you to start doing this using continuous integration. But you can write your own API code as well. Now we got a few minutes remaining, so I want to make sure I answer these questions. So I'm going to, from a Tower perspective, I'm just going to leave that running and let that playbook continue, and we can answer questions about that as well. Meanwhile, let me drop into our interface here. Lots of great questions, so let's get. First question, at some point we discussed the version of Python Ansible supports. Yep, Ansible is currently a 2.x Python application. It's not a Python 3 application. In the future, we are about to release Ansible 2.0, but that does not provide Python 3 support. It starts to get there, but we haven't done all that work yet. And of course, all that happens in the open source community, so you can happily follow along, on GitHub and see all that work. But it's a lot of work, and we want to do it the right way. And we're always trying to preserve backwards compatibility with Ansible. So taking all that in mind, we're moving slowly but surely in that direction, definitely. How well does Ansible integrate with Red Hat Satellite? Great question. Red Hat just acquired the company just a few weeks ago, and so the integration will get better. Currently, the integration is such that you have basically what we call a dynamic inventory sync script for Red Hat Network Satellite within Ansible, and you can use that with Ansible Tower. So what do I mean by that? With Ansible and Ansible Tower, you can synchronize inventories to an upstream provider, right? Just like I'm doing here with Amazon. I'm synchronizing Tower with Amazon to pull in my production inventory, or you can do the same thing with Satellite. It's a custom script. It's not built into the UI, but it's there and you can use it. In the future, over the next year or so, Ansible and Tower and Satellite will be further integrated. You will likely see the ability for Satellite to call out to Tower through the API to invoke actions and vice versa. That's all in planning right now, but you can imagine that's a high priority for Red Hat, absolutely, to integrate Ansible with all of its products. Next question is, can Ansible update itself via same automation process? Yes. Ansible's Python application. You can use Ansible to update itself, and of course Tower is upgraded through the installer as well, so it's pretty straightforward. Next question, what about if I have different users for different hosts? Is there a way to specify that use particular username for login? Yeah, you can do that. Of course, it's a little bit more complex. In Tower, you would use a different credential for each host, which might get a little bit too complex. Another way to do that would be to affix a variable to an entire group of hosts. So, for example, in an inventory, you can have as many of these groups as you want, and any group can have variables attached to it. So, for my Jenkins group, for example, I could have Ansible user SSH user equal to foo or something else, and that will override whatever user that I'm using for just this group of hosts. And I can set that on a per host basis as well. But using a different username for each host will. What do we got here? Let's see. Oh yeah, now in the playbook, which was your follow-up question to that same question, you don't have to specify the variable in Tower. You could also do it in the playbook itself. So you could say for this host use this username, for this host use this one, and you can even do that on an individual task basis. Yeah, you can specify the user inside the playbook, definitely. Can Ansible access iCloud? That one I'm not sure of off the top of my head. I'll have to follow up with me. By the way, everyone, I'm Dave at Ansible.com. So write that down and feel free to send me anything at all. I'm pretty technical. I'm Dave, D-A-V-E, at Ansible.com. So send me that question about iCloud. I don't know that one off the top of my head. Can you talk about the new blocks feature in Ansible 2.0? Yeah, just briefly. Ansible 2.0 is on its way. It's currently in beta. Second beta, I should say, and I do expect that to be released in the next few weeks here. But we don't have a specific ETA on that we can announce. And so there are a number of new features to Ansible 2.0, including try and accept blocks, which give you some more programming language-like functionality around exception clauses, basically, so that in addition to what you could already do, which is ignore errors on a task and then move on and do something else, you can do that in a little bit more programmatic way using try accept clauses. There's a number of other features in there as well, like strategies, which is a nice way for controlling how Ansible simultaneously or in what order it connects to your hosts. Ansible has some default ways that it orders host connections, and you have a little bit of control over that today, but in Ansible 2.0 you get even broader control. Let's see, next question. Puppet offers a free 5-node version of Puppet Enterprise. We do the same thing with Tower, actually. So with Ansible Tower, let me go back to, where is that? Here we go. Yep. With Ansible Tower, you can get a free trial of Tower, and Tower is also free for up to 10 nodes, right? So you can use Tower free for up to 10 nodes without paying anything at all. So, and that's beyond trial. Let's see, what else do we have? Do most enterprise users run Ansible on a server? Is it recommended to run on a server so that multiple teams, users can access Ansible, etc.? Well, of course, I'm biased towards Tower, right? And so we would say that Tower is that solution for your particular problem there. The problem being multiple teams, users that can access Ansible on a single server. That's really what Tower is designed for. For people that don't use Tower, yeah, it is common to host Ansible on a server somewhere, but it's not necessary at all, right? You can run Ansible from your laptop, and that's really why Tower exists, is because of the complexities of not having a centralized server. Next question is, does Ansible or Tower integrate with commercial CMDB tooling like ServiceNow or Atrium to create report on YAML config data as config items in a CMDB? Not natively. We have had customers do ServiceNow integrations, mostly on the continuous integration side, kicking off using ServiceNow as a catalog to then provide self-service to users to kick off jobs through Tower. So I haven't seen it integrate quite at that level. It's certainly doable. It would probably require some coding from the ServiceNow side rather than the Tower side. So we haven't done any of that work as of yet, although we do have some partnership with ServiceNow that is definitely possible. But I haven't seen that specific integration as of yet, no. Next question, is Tower available for free on commercial use for more than 30 days? Yeah, if you want to trial longer than 30 days, then you just need to contact us directly through sales. So again, you can hit me up at dave@ansible.com, or you can contact us at info@ansible.com. If you already are in contact with sales, then that's the way to go, and we're happy to provide longer than 30-day trials for Tower. Yeah, definitely. Next question, how does Ansible handle ordering of tasks? Puppet is quite painful. Yes, Puppet is quite painful in that area. You're absolutely right, and so I think I've covered that one already, but it's top to bottom. There's no dependency reordering. The only thing that happens out of order is handlers like that Apache handler to restart Apache at the end. Next question is there any way of configuring jump servers to access? Yep, absolutely. Ansible and Tower both honor the SSH configuration. So just configure SSH normally as you would for a jump host, telling it where the jump host is when you're trying to SSH to that band of network of that hosts, and Ansible and Tower will both honor that happily, absolutely. There's no other configuration that you have to do, nothing specific to Ansible or to Tower. There's a question about Google Cloud support. Yep, Ansible and Tower both support Google Cloud natively. There's a bunch of modules that Google has provided, and Tower can synchronize directly with Google Cloud. There's 3 more questions, but I recognize we're at the top of the hour, so I'll pass back to our moderators graciously. If we have time, I'm happy to answer these last 3 questions or anything else, but certainly respective of your time today.
Hi, Dave. Yes, you can continue and carry on the rest of the questions now if you'd like to.
Perfect. Yeah, it looks like there's only 3 left. So next question is, how would you manage different config parameters for different environments? The best practice there is to abstract. I abstracted out the database user. For that, I also abstracted out the repository from where I'm going to deploy the application version of that web application details, and then the playbook will expect to add those in. You can set some defaults in some variables files alongside the playbook so that you can have can override things like here in the job template or on the command line, or in a lot of different other places. You can also set, as we saw a little bit ago, you can set variables on a particular host, on a whole group of hosts, or an entire could read those values as well. So if you had HTTP port number set in development for all development machines to a certain value different than production, then you could easily just go into your inventory, find that set of machines, group them together, and then set a variable on